and welcome to Ask GMBN Tech, the opportunity for you guys to ask us questions by using hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments of any of our videos so that we can find them, pick them up and answer them on a show like this. And I believe, Owen, you have the first question today.
We do, really fun one from Rob Hill. So, any idea why my high-speed compression dial keeps turning without stopping? This is on his Zeb Ultimate fork. Oh. Very nice fork. Yeah, I mean, key point, that doesn't sound correct. There should be a hard stop in there somewhere. So assuming you've got the latest fork, which, it should be on the right-hand leg, you've got this new Charger 3, which doesn't have the bladder, it's new and jazzy. There's a stack of adjusters on it. The one that's closer to the crown is the high-speed compression. The uppermost dial is then the low-speed compression. And yeah, the dial should stop turning at some point because effectively it's opening and closing various valves within that damper unit. And yeah, if it's just turning, I mean, I guess, can you feel any difference would be one thing in terms of when it turns. Because if you can't and it's just free moving, there should be. I think it's a 2mm hex bolt that holds it onto the kind of like the, I guess, damper shaft or adjustment shaft. So if that's gone, easy fix. Find a tiny wee little one or just go to the parts section. I think it's for less than 50 quid, which I know sounds a lot, but you get all the knobs to go on top. New ones, freshies, which are all good, and you'll get all the attachment bolts. So next time, use more sort of like thread locking or surface thread prep so it doesn't go walkabouts. If it's not, and the bolt isn't gone, and it is still there, and it's not, it's not just that you need to tighten it up, sounds like it's a bit tricky, and I would say probably take it to your suspension tuner. It won't be massively expensive to get a new kit, I don't think. But yeah, it's one of those ones is if it's just spinning freely, it shouldn't do that. So get it checked.
Okay, my question is from Shad Life, who says, is there an easy way to detect where a creak is on a bike? I have a carbon full suspension frame that is subtly creaking. I hear it while seated and standing. I can't tell if it's front or rear. It would be neat if there was an electronic tool that could tell us where the sound is coming from. Yeah, any tips or tricks, that would be awesome. Alas, there is no Creak Finder 3000 on the market just yet, unless you're going to patent one, are you?
Yeah, I am going to run out now. Just
excellent.
I'll be back.
It would be a great idea, but sadly, you are the Creak Finder 3000 because you have all the sensory needs or gizmos.
Gizmos, yeah,
eyes,
exactly. Yeah.
Ears to use to find your creak. You're going to have to do a bit of detective work. Maybe work systematically from front to rear, isolate certain parts, maybe the wheels, maybe the suspension, maybe any bearings that you can see, and try and feel and hear if there's any kind of movement, vibrations around that creak. Generally, you can feel where the creak comes from better than you can hear it because the sound resonates around the frame. So do try and do a bit of detective work. And usually creaks will be solved by a simple disassemblement of your bike, a grease up or a clean, a grease up and a reassemble, and it should be working nice and quietly.
Really good question here from Sebster58. Good question here. He's bought some less aggressive tyres for an upcoming event, and he's got some TPU tubes because he was thinking he was going to change tubes to some lighter wheels, lighter tyres and lighter tubes. But then he opened up the tyres and he realised his bike had been pseudo set up tubeless. And we say pseudo because it didn't have any tubeless sealant in. And he was kind of like, is this normal?
Lazy.
Well, and he was also asking, there's a raised section around the valve seat. He didn't want to kind of swap the tyres because he was a bit afraid that it may affect the TPU tubes. So should he say tubeless or should he go for the new tyres and the TPU tube? So lots of great points here. And so I guess it depends. I mean, first, great idea to switch to a less aggressive tyre because, tyre knobs and rolling resistance sort of are two counterpoints. You can't have a really grippy tyre that rolls quickly. So great idea if you're doing a distance event to switch to a faster rolling tyre. Tubelessness without the tyre sealant from the factory is not actually that surprising. I know it sounds a bit odd, like you'd always need it, and you do, but if you're a factory that's sending out lots of bikes, they often expect, well, either the sort of the bike shop that you buy the bike from, or if it's straight to consumer, they might send it with you. And that's because if you had a spillage of tubelessness sealant in transit and it spilled into the cardboard box, it's not going to be toxic for the cardboard box, but it is going to make it damp, and effectively it might damage the box, and thus you might have a damaged bike when it comes through.
And it can dry out over time as well if they had it in storage for a long
Yeah,
period
no,
of time.
true,
so it
very
wouldn't
true.
be great for
No,
a
exactly.
user.
I think it's not that surprising. I would say with your new tyres that you've bought, do double check, because it is now the norm. I think it is the new norm that many tyres are tubeless ready. So do check. And yeah, traditionally a lot of tubeless setups, you didn't need dedicated tyres. You needed dedicated rims and the sealant and the valves. But obviously, yeah, do be really careful, because, okay, while the risk of the tyre popping off a bead is relatively low in the grand scheme of things, it can happen, and that would stop you really quickly, so it wouldn't be great. So do double check if the tyre is tubeless ready or not. In regards to running those TPU tubes, it sounds like, and it's always tricky to sort of like guesstimate from just the question, but it sounds like those rims that you've got maybe got a tubeless rim strip in. This is often used to help seal up the rim and provide a good seat for that valve. So it might have a high step, but I think it will be fine for the TPU tubes. They are, whilst they feel fragile, they are actually pretty tough. So yeah, fingers crossed those new tyres are tubeless ready. And if you've got more tips, or you need more tips, we've got quite a lot out there ongoing tubeless, so check those out for help. Let us know how the event goes.
Okay, my question from CRA55 says, is there a way to determine the tyre clearance of a frame if you cannot find the manufacturer's spec? I have an old discontinued frame, info is a bit sparse. I've tried putting 2.4s in and it only had a hair's width left between the edge of the knobs and the chainstays. Basically, is there an actual minimum recommended gap between tyre and frame? Yes, ideally you want about 10 to 15 mils of gap between the tyre or the extremities of the knobs on the tyre and the frame itself. If you've got a hardtail, it's easier to find this. If you've got a full suspension bike, then you might want to let all of the air out of the rear shock so that the suspension compresses, and you can check that that tyre is not coming in contact with anything on the frame. If it's too big, it might do, and you don't want that. Now, it can be a bit difficult buying tyres, because not only are different manufacturers have different ideas of what sizes are. So for example, a 2.4 from one brand might not be literally 2.4 inches, and some brands might be. And the reason being is because they're made for certain rim widths, usually, or with a certain rim width in mind. And if you put a tyre on a wide one or a narrow one, it can change the shape and the width and the size overall of the tyre. So unfortunately, the best way of doing this is what you've done already, is trial and error. It's trying to put a tyre in and see what the physical clearance is. But if you've updated your bike, my first question is, please, can we have something in the uploader? If you've got an old retro bike that you're updating, then that sounds like a top mod to me. Does
Definitely,
it not,
yeah.
Owen? So the uploader link will be in the description below. We would love to see your bike.
Right, here's a great question from Angus. Love this question. How can I make my bike heavier without spending any money? Well, I mean, it's a fun question. So, with no money, that's the sort of stalling point.
Depends what you've got lying around the house.
Well, it does. So if this is a bit of a daft question, we'll go with the daft answer initially. You could fill your tyres, assuming they're tubeless. Actually, you could do it with butyl tubes. You could fill them with water. That would make your bike lots heavier. And yeah, you'd definitely add mass. You'd feel it as rotational mass, so your bike would just, steamroller thrust.
Location, location, location. If this is a serious question and you're doing this for descending properties, tyres is probably not the place you want to put them, is it?
No, you steamroll it. It'd be great. Okay, admittedly, there's some drawbacks to that. So if you're wanting to add weight and you're wanting to do it in a kind of like, cool, I want to play with sprung versus unsprung mass, which is this big thing. Lots of e-bikes feel really, really good because the balance between sprung mass and unsprung mass is balanced. Whereas lots of acoustic bikes where the frame is really, really light and the suspension parts are a bit heavier, mean this balance is sort of out of whack. So it makes it harder to set up suspension. So if you're looking to play in this space, which is a fun one, doing it for free is harder, But if you went down your building merchants, you might be able to get some lead pipe or some sections of lead and using that to wrap strategically on your bike, probably low down around the bottom bracket. I have seen some people putting it in the steer tube because that's where a good place for the mass is and it can change how your steering feels as well, would be another option. But yeah, if you're just doing it for shits and giggles, try watering your wheels.